to the WWH show. This is a show that asks a series of why, what, and how questions on topics that are very, very important to you, our audience. Today we're going to talk about why problem solving and decision making in leadership matter. In this studio, I have a privilege to discuss this topic with Dr. Mel Schnapper. He is an international consultant based in Washington, D.C., but he has been working with many great companies like Quaker Oats Company and Chicago Board Options Exchange in Chicago, and also he has been working for various ministries in Afghanistan, Palestine, and elsewhere, and worked in 26 countries. He is also the author of this book, which is entitled Value-Based Metrics for Improving Results. You can get this book for free if you attend a seminar. You may contact Dr. Schnapper at mel@schnappper.com. Dr. Schnapper, thank you very much for coming.
I'm Assegid.
I'm Assegid.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you travel, even recently you traveled to Kenya, but you found the time to come here and share with our audience about the importance of problem solving and ethical decision making. So I appreciate you being here.
Okay, you're welcome.
So my first question is why problem solving and decision making in leadership matter?
Okay. As leaders, they're very accountable in their leadership role for important decisions that impact the allocation of people, money, time, all kinds of efforts. So for that leadership role to be effective, they should have good problem-solving skills. But let me address the word problem, because later on I think we will address the word situation.
Yes.
A situation is a number of circumstances that exist, okay? It's a problem if you don't like it. So I remember working in Afghanistan where my colleagues would say, Mel, we have a problem. And I'd say, no, it's acceptable to me. It's a situation. If I don't like it, then it's a problem. And I'd say, now what's the situation? And eventually, after weeks and months of working with me, they would start saying, Mel, we have a situation.
So it's very important to differentiate between situation and problem. Otherwise, we may treat them the same, and it's not good.
Yeah, because often in whether you're a leader, supervisor, manager, or a parent, two people will see the same situation, but for one it's okay, and for another it's a problem. And the distinction is the emotionality, that someone's unhappy about the situation, then it becomes a problem.
So why problems and wrong decision-making suffocate many organizations?
Right. It depends on the leadership style. Like when I'm in the role of leader, which I often am, in the past it's been in an organizational context. Now it's more on a short-term basis as a team leader. One thing I let my team members know is whatever I say is one opinion. It's not the right way. Especially like in Kenya where I'm working now, I tell my Kenyan colleagues that I'm not Kenyan, although this is my 6th trip to Kenya. You know, I've been working there with some frequency. I'm never going to understand the local politics and culture to be as intimately involved as they are. So I let them know that, obvious to them, I'm an outsider, but I'm dependent on them to contribute to my decision making. And any decision I make or propose, it's just that, it's a proposal. It's not the way we're going to do it, but I want to get the discussion going by offering a proposal. And over time, when local consultants start to trust me that I really mean what I say, then we have lots of debates and discussion, and often the decision is far from what I would have imagined a good decision is, but our collective agreement is the right one, as we later find out. So my leadership role is maybe paradoxically to let people I'm working or leading is that I'm dependent on them to be an effective leader.
So you follow this collective leadership where you involve your people to make decision with you. So what I'm hearing from you is that many organizations might have been suffocating because the leaders might not be giving their people the option to involve in the decision-making process.
Yeah, and often, not so much so in the States, but to a greater extent than ought to be, when I'm working overseas, typically the leadership model is autocratic. You know, if the boss says do it this way, that's it. There's no discussion. And sometimes in the States as well. But in the States more so, and it's in my leadership role, is basically group decision making. The leader can propose, facilitate, but I like to encourage other people to contribute so that they're doing the work instead of me.
I think many, research results show that, for example, in some industries, like for example in military or other, hierarchical organizations, yes, the leader may be the one making the decisions, right, especially those important policy and strategic decisions. But organizations like yours, like consultants and other organizations, they should have benefited if they have this kind of flat kind of organizational structure where you involve the people from top to bottom, engage them and let them own the problem, own the decision. But as we can see in today's organization, those successful companies like Apple or Google and so on, they have this flat organizational design where they allow people to innovate at the lower level, make micro decisions, so the leader doesn't involve in micro decision making.
Yeah, I think a very powerful tool that so many leaders neglect is to delegate, to let everyone know everything, because my leadership model is based on persuasion and candor and transparency, not on being autocratic or commanding. But I think you raised a good point. There are circumstances, certainly under a military warlike situation, where you don't say, "Oh, we're being attacked now. What do you think we ought to do?" That's not that's not an appropriate leadership style. So there's one leadership model where there's a continuum from autocratic to abdicratic, where you abdicate, and then depending on the emergency or the trust in the group and maturity of group decision making, I'm always consciously processing all these 100 leadership models in my head and hopefully picking the appropriate one.
So those organizations that are struggling with so many problems, is that because they don't have a system how to solve problems when they show up? What do you think is the most important problem when it comes to organizations unable to effectively and efficiently solve problems?
Okay, the answer could be an hour long in and of itself.
1 minute or two.
Yeah, let me give you the short answer. When I worked at Quaker Oats Company in Chicago, I reported to a VP of HR, and his boss was the president of the division. And the president was ultimately effective, and I used to talk to him frequently, and I was put in a dilemma where his vice presidents were often afraid to tell him about an approaching problem, not just a situation. And his posture was, if they come to me with a problem, why am I paying them? So his message to his subordinates was, don't come to me with problems, even when it would be appropriate. And I couldn't tell him what their problems were, because then I would violate their trust in me. Yeah. And I would tell them when they would seek my counseling, your message is very appropriate, but you're talking to the wrong person. But they just didn't have the courage. They thought the risk was far greater than I thought it was. But when organizations are dysfunctional, and corporate culture, which is another popular phrase these days, that depends on the top leader's behavior. Because people will follow, not that everyone are like sheep, but too much so. And if you want to change corporate culture, and there are all kinds of models and approaches, look at the top level person and what's his or her behavior, because that's where corporate culture is determined and maintained.
I like that idea. When I provide trainings to corporations, mid-level managers and so on, what we do is first we give them assessments. So now they know, the leaders know their, for example, conflict mode, or their personality type, their emotional intelligence, and so on. That really creates awareness to them. They know now that what kind of leadership style they have, how they tackle problems, how they solve conflicts, and so on and so forth. So awareness is very important. Of course, as you said, if I'm working under a leader, it's my responsibility to understand his style, his approaches, and so on. That way I could be able to contribute something in terms of solving problems, and also contributing something so that the leader may make right and good decisions.
Right, and sometimes leaders don't make my initial speech of telling people, I'm dependent on you, my job is to make your job easier, your job is to take away my job, so I don't have to lead you anymore, and I'll give you all the space you can handle to go about doing things on your own. And what I would like as your leader is not for you to come to me with a problem, but to come to me with maybe 2 or 3 solutions for my consultative advice, meaning I'm not telling you what to do, I'm giving you my opinion. And if you make a mistake, that's fine. It's probably not going to be disastrous. The worst is I might be embarrassed, and I've been embarrassed before, and so what?
By the way, this takes a lot of confidence from the leader's side, because you have to have that confidence in you to let your people make decisions, solve problems. I met many great leaders, and you know that they are confident and competent when you see them, that they value their people, that they avoid making every decision, they avoid involving at micro level. So first, the leader should have that confidence. I mean, many leaders, they want to know everything going on in their organization, even at lower level. So it takes confidence for a leader to really delegate and push some of the decisions, some of the problems to these people.
Yeah, in one company where I was head of the organization development and training department, I hired someone who was really brilliant. In fact, I hired her because during the interview, she asked me 2 or 3 questions that I'd never thought about and had no answer for. So I told her, I'll hire you on one condition. And she said, what's that? I said, that you keep asking me questions that I cannot answer. So that's how we started off our relationship. Anyway, she was really good. But months later, she would call me, because she traveled a lot, as I did. She would ask me for what my opinion was about what she should do. And I said, what do you think you should do? And eventually, she still didn't have the confidence, even though she was extremely competent. I told her that in the next month or 2, I expect her to make some disastrous mistake. And if she doesn't, I'm going to be very unhappy. So the next time you're faced with a decision, don't call me. I won't be available. Make a good mistake. The worst that can happen is I'll be embarrassed. And so what?
I mean, I like this idea, because now you are pushing that person to grow, because
right.
You can't grow unless you make decisions and fail, because you have to pick up yourself, learn from that experience, move on. If you are always careful not to make a mistake, you can't grow. So for you, I mean, I see a smartness in this approach, because if I am a leader and I have 20 people under my influence, why should I struggle to answer all questions, solve all the problems, make all the decisions? I can tap into the 20 people's smartness, intelligence, and wisdom by giving them opportunities. But my question is, I mean, we can debate about that. Don't you need to give them some kind of guidance how they should make decisions? For example, I'm just suggesting, let's say that you have some values in that organization. You can give people this authority, saying that, okay, as far as your decisions are aligned alongside our values and our business strategy, make decisions. If you fail, don't worry. So because they have to have this reference to see, okay, is my decision against our values? Is my decision compromises our strategic choice?
Good.
So what kind of tip or what kind of mentoring do you do before you let people make their own decisions and solve problems by themselves?
I've been fortunate. I've inherited, when I came into a company as the new boss, which is different from being a leader, I've inherited twice, people who are really not competent. But when I've always hired people who are very competent, just the interview and my gut feeling about them. And one way I interview people is, for the next week, I'm going to give you something to do, and that will determine whether or not I hire you. And I make the assignment deliberately ambiguous, because I'm not interested in whether or not they understand me. What I'm interested in is, will they come back to me and say, Mel, what do you mean? I want them to learn early, even before they're hired, that if I'm not giving you clear directions, they come back to me before wasting any time, which is what I do when I report to someone and they give me an assignment that I don't fully understand. I will not leave that conversation until I have total clarity about what to do. I'm not here or there to waste anyone's time or my own.
So you come up with some insightful, some probing questions.
Questions, right, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about ethical decision making.
Okay.
Because people may make decisions as they want, but the question is their decision ethical? How can we make ethical decisions?
Okay. Ethics is a very ambiguous concept, as we know from business and government and, worldwide. So different companies have different ethical concerns, or they may have a charter of ethics toward customers or ethics within the company itself. I look at a company's history of, quote, ethical behavior, and then in my leadership role, and typically the ethics are just the usual rhetoric of, respect and candor and trust and reliability and all that, what I call corporate rhetoric, meaning it may or may not have substance, but it looks good in a report, okay? And I've had no real ethical issues. One reason might be I have no ethics. That's a joke. If you have no ethics, you have no ethical dilemma, okay? I've really not dealt with a lot of ethical concerns. One time, and this is a rarity, I was running a program in Somalia, and the then president, Siad Barre, his daughter was in my class, and we agreed as a class that no one would get a certificate if they missed more than two classroom sessions of training. And this woman never showed up. So it came to the end of the course for awarding certificates and a ceremony. It would be on television and so forth, and I would not sign for her certificate. So my boss, who was an AID official, said, well, Mel, you can't do that. She's the president's daughter. I said, we came to a classroom decision. I'm not going to violate the ethics of my commitment. I'm not going to sign it, but you're free to forge my signature. It's up to you. That's a political decision. I'm not going to participate. I don't know about it. I anticipated being embarrassed that she might show up just to get the certificate. Fortunately, she didn't show up for that either. So, but my ethical concern was I'd made a commitment to the participants, and I wasn't going to violate it. I might have brought it up again for them, and I did sort of obliquely, and they said, no, you ought to sign it. I said, do you agree with that? No, so I didn't.
So it's a very important point that you raised, because making decisions based on wrong is easy. Let's say you have two choices, both of them are wrong, and then you have difficulty to choose one of them. Let's say that you have two rights, right and right.
Okay.
It's very difficult to choose between the two, because let me make it clear. When it is wrong and right, it's very easy. You can choose right. When it is right and right, that's when the challenge comes. Which right you're going to take? So we are discussing this to help people, because we understand that many of our audience, they are decision makers. They are making decisions at home, in their community, in their organization, and also they have problems, challenges, they have to fix them. So we are talking here to help them get some insights, tools, methods on how to solve problems and how to make ethical decisions. So one of the things that I think challenging for our audience maybe is, how can they make decisions between two rights?
Good. Okay. One concept I have in my head is this decision, is it going to be tactical or strategic? So a decision that's right for tactical, meaning short term, like next week or next month, could be the wrong decision strategically. And it could be the right decision strategically, but it's wrong tactically. So that's another concept I carry around between my ears. Is this the right decision? Hopefully it's the right decision both tactically and strategically.
I like that because, sometimes you may have two rights. Let's say it may be right
for now,
the individual.
Yeah.
Yes, for now.
But disastrous.
The long term.
Right.
The long term. And also it may be right for the individual, maybe wrong to your community. Right to the employee, but maybe wrong to the organization. So when you have that kind of dilemma, you have to have a ground to make decisions. Of course, people, they may have their own values, and based on their values, maybe this decision is right. For another person, based on their values, this decision is the right one. So leaders should have this ahead of time to like you did. You have a strategic or a tactical decision. So even if your decision may have some consequences, at least you decided that ahead of time, and always you use that tool to make decisions. That helps you make decisions, especially between two rights. You know that both of them are right, except that one is strategic.
Short term versus long term.
Yeah.
Right.
So individual versus community. Long term, short term. So we have to have that kind of methods to deal with some decisions so that we may make a right decision.
And it's more complicated than that because if it's long term, I have to consider, are there local or internal capacity to sustain that long-term decision? It may be that the people I'm working with or for have the capacity for something immediate and short-term, but they don't have it for long-term. So besides short versus long-term or tactical versus strategic, there could be another 50 variables that I have to take into account.
Of course, if we see the case in Ethiopia, for example, the current government made a decision to support ethnic groups, for example, to organize people based on their ethnic groups. And they say that we protect the ethnic rights of people, sometimes by overriding individual rights. You could be, for example, from one ethnic group and you live in another region where your language is not the primary language of that region. You may not be from the ethnic group of that state. Now, you're not first-class citizen, or you're not even considered when decisions are made because you may not be speaking their language, you're not member of that ethnic group, so you may not get a job, you may not do business, and so on. Knowing that many individuals are dashed through the process, they still stick with deciding with the group thinking.
Right.
This is, if you are Amhara, work in Amhara, live in Amhara, do business in Amhara. If you see it in a shorter term, emotionally, it may be right. But if you see in the long run, it affects the country, because this is a globalized world. Why you should really put people in their ethnic group and make them work, interact, do business only with their own ethnic group? We have to go out even compete internationally. This is a globalized world. There is technology. So you see that there are short-term decisions governments are making, but in the long term, obviously, that affects the future of the country, and that also destroys many lives in the process.
Yeah, a lot of countries have policies that are similar to that. That's called affirmative action. In Nigeria, where I work also frequently, and I had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria way back in '65, probably well before many of you in the audience were even born. That was like 50 years ago. They have a national policy that every national ministry or federal ministry is supposed to reflect the diversity of the country. Well, it's a policy, but it doesn't work because, if you're from a certain area, you want to hire your cousin, And that's another issue, but I don't even want to get into it.
Yeah, I know it's challenging, but what I know is that, yes, you have to maybe do sometimes affirmative actions.
Yeah.
If you institutionalize it, that's the problem. For example, you may support certain groups because their rights were violated, or
historically, right?
Yeah, historically, compensate them, help them, empower them, and then come back to doing things the right way, the merit-based. But if you always keep on giving merits to people, it really affects other people. It affects innovation and so on. So there should be a kind of limit. Yes, we should give affirmative actions, but it should not be institutionalized, and it should not be for a long period of time.
Okay, I know all the arguments. Years ago for the U.S. Department of Labor here in D.C., I ran affirmative action workshops. So I know all the arguments, pro and con. And the irony is, at that time, I don't know about today, the Department of Labor had the worst profile of minorities at different managerial and executive levels. And the DOL was supposed to enforce affirmative action across all the rest of the cabinet level departments, and yet they themselves had the worst statistics regarding, African Americans and females. This goes back a few years where this country was not as diverse. Now I would say people of color, so it would include Asians and anyone else. But no, affirmative action is a difficult issue. I have my own positive and standard position on that, but it's an issue that some people say is unfair, and others say we can't get to equal opportunity because everyone's not equal. So we have to level the playing field first, and then we can have equal opportunity. I've heard all the arguments.
Let's talk about how we can become effective problem solvers.
Okay, good. Again, I'm not sure a situation is a problem, first of all, unless I'm unhappy with it, or other people are. So I prefer to deal with situations. And part of making a problem a situation is to listen to people and what they're unhappy about. So we can not get rid of the emotions, but at least recognize that emotionality is a legitimate area for discussion. Because how people feel about something really determines more than their brain what they ought to do. And there are more and more books coming out that indicate that we're not the rational, logical human beings we like to think we are, but we're really irrational, and it's based on our genes and other forms of decision making that are not even consciously
making decisions.
Yeah, they're not. I'm blocking again. Pardon my senior moment here. We don't have access. That's the word I was looking for. We often don't have access to what's underlying our decision. But after we make a decision, we look back and rationalize about how much sense it made, or didn't, but still we're not dealing with our own emotions. In terms of an organizational context and problem solving, for me, I try to anticipate what conditions might exist for a situation to become a problem. And then I have to decide, is it worth the effort now to keep it as a situation and not a problem that will make me or others unhappy? Or is it something to attend to immediately to make sure it never becomes a problem? And that can happen in any area. And there are a lot of people I work for or I work with that something's not worth their attention until it's a crisis. And you can look at our American government for most of its decision-making about problems when it could have been anticipated 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. But like the California drought. I mean, for decades, California has been consuming water in a disproportionate manner. I think the water in California is 90% spent on agriculture, on food and fruit that people can stop eating, and then everyone else can have more than enough water. But I don't want to get into the politics is another variable in decision making as to how decisions are made or whether it's a decision about a situation or a problem. But a lot of it's just people not anticipating how a number of facts might become a problem.
So when we make decisions, we should pay closer attention to their effect, let's say, in the long term. And also we should have adequate data to make our decisions.
Yeah, like the current debate, are we in climate warming or climate change? And if we are, which most people seem to agree, why? Is it just part of the way the universe functions? Or is it because you won't give up your SUV when you come here every morning?
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, it's very interesting. So let's talk about how we can become efficient and also effective in decision making.
Okay, let me distinguish between efficiency and effectiveness. And so often in the reports I read, people it's like they can't use one word without the other. Like they can't use the word goal without objectives, when I use them very distinctly. So I have a master's in applied linguistics. So I pay attention to words and language. And when people say, oh, that's just semantics, my response is, what else do you have? Do we go into...
Words are very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's words. That's how we are talking, you and I, right now. When it comes to efficiency and effectiveness, and I'm sure in your life you've had the experience of someone telling you, I need it now. And you say, what do you mean by now? Because now could mean tomorrow and it could mean within 5 minutes. But if the urgency is now, you're probably not that concerned about effectiveness. You're concerned about efficiency. What's my minimum deliverable to make this person happy? And if someone says to you, I don't care how long it takes, but I want it to be good. I want the highest quality possible. Then you're concerned about it being effective, and efficiency is irrelevant because you have all the time in the world. And we're doing this every day, almost every hour, as we get into our car. Am I concerned with getting there safely or quickly? As happened to me this morning, not anticipating the tie-up in Rock Creek Park, which is typically the most efficient and effective. This morning, well, I did get here on time ultimately, but I was really worried. So anytime we do something, whether it's conscious or not, we're debating between efficiency or effectiveness. Now, in organizations, what I tell people in a leadership role is, when will you have this done? And they'll say, okay, Wednesday. And I'll say, absolutely. And they'll say, well, probably. And I'll say, what's absolutely the deliverable time? And they'll say, okay, Thursday. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. So I'm holding you to Thursday. In that case, I'm making the other person accountable for a deadline they set for their deliverable, whether it's a training program or a report. So in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, I distinguish between the two, and I train people who work with me to make that same distinction.
Interesting. So first we should differentiate the words and see which one is efficient, which one is effective, because it looks like they are mutually exclusive.
They're not, often they are, but if you have enough time to do something effectively, it'll be efficient also, because that's really not a variable. But what I do in my leadership role, and because I've studied leadership and part of my PhD work was involved with leadership, is to make the ways we think, bring them to a level of consciousness, to a level of articulating in dialogue between me as a leader and other people as followers. They'll say, I'll get this done, and I'll say, is that going to be effective? Sounds like it'll be efficient. Or I'll say, it sounds like it's going to be efficient. Will it be effective? So I'm always making these calculated distinctions in my own head, and in my leadership role, making it explicit to those I'm leading.
So let's talk about methods, systems, or metrics that we use in problem solving and decision.
Okay. My favorite method, it's a number of steps, but people talk about brainstorming. Typically, brainstorming is for 2 or 3 possible solutions. And we have brainstorming exercises like how many uses for a paperclip, where people come up with 5 when there are 20. My rule for brainstorming is at least 10, even when people are frustrated and they don't want to go any further. So one group decision-making exercise is let's brainstorm. And then everyone has their sometimes really silly idea out on the flip chart, or now it's projected from the laptop. Chips using a flip chart shows my age, I suppose. And at some point it'll be use your smartwatch, or where there's nothing in the room, it's just people, okay, that's brainstorming number 5. So brainstorming is a key technique for reaching good decisions. Another decision-making process is to identify everyone's needs. Well, we need a decision that meets everyone's needs, and I go to Maslow's hierarchy, which is, readily understood. Are we talking about survival, life and death? Probably not. Are we talking about security? Maybe. Is it really security of employment? Probably not. Is it accomplishment? Something that will give us recognition and, put us in good reputation within the organizational context. So I'll use Maslow's hierarchy and make sure everyone understands it. That takes like 5 minutes. And I'm really in a decision-making leadership role where the decision has to be made within 10 minutes. Usually it's a couple of hours or a half a day or by tomorrow. So I have the opportunity as a leader to train people for their own capacity development in their own leadership skills. So identifying everyone's needs, including my own, brainstorming. Another is to teach people how to, if the decision is around conflict, I teach them iMessages. And that comes from a course I took years ago called Leader Effectiveness Training by Tom Gordon. I'm not that brilliant to have written that program, okay? So it's the iMessage, which is now far widely dispersed in many, many programs without acknowledgement of Tom Gordon. And the iMessage is describing someone else's behavior in a way they will agree with, describe how you feel about it, and describe the immediate, past, or probable consequences. And to get agreement that iMessage correctly describes the problem. And the reason I use the word problem now is we would not be having that discussion about problem solving if people were not unhappy about the situation.
By the way, one thing that came into my mind is whenever we try to solve problems or
change a situation,
there is always conflict. And now the leader's smartness and ability to solve conflict is dependent on his way of handling conflicts. The modes that he prefers. So whenever I provide trainings on conflict resolution, the first thing we do is we ask them to take assessments, the TKI assessment, Thomas Kilmann assessment.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, that's...
So now when people get that result, they could be able to see that which conflict mode they use the majority of the time. There are...
Negotiator, confronter, I forgot the 4.
The 5 ones: avoider,
right,
avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and collaborating.
Okay.
So some people, whenever they have this, when they solve problems, when conflict arises, when there is confrontation, they have this preferred mode of conflict management. It could be avoiding, they avoid, or it could be competing. But one thing we emphasize in our training is, first, it depends on the situation.
Right.
Let's say that I'm most of the time avoider. I want to take time. I want to step out, reflect about it before I make decision, before I confront, or before I compete. But sometimes this mode of conflict management is not appropriate.
Right.
Maybe a time where I need to confront, I need to compete, maybe I need to compromise. So I don't need to delay it. I have to make decision right there. So the ability of the leader to know his preferences, because some of the preferences may be least used, least utilized, and also the ability to know the corporate culture. Now, I'm a good decision maker, but I have to understand the corporate culture, and I have to make decisions based on the corporate culture. Let's say that I'm working in a corporation, let's say Apple. This is a corporation where innovation is very important. If you become a competitor, if you confront, if you challenge the status quo, you are incentivized, appreciated, because you can't innovate unless you challenge the status quo. But go to charitable organizations, non-profit organizations. Many of the people maybe are not paid well. They are there just to support the vision. Maybe they're not paid. So if you are always competing, when you make decisions, always you want them to accept your decision, that doesn't motivate the people there. Maybe you need to be a little bit accommodate people's ideas, people's decisions, so that way you could be able to tap into the potential of the people. So the corporate culture is also very important to understand when you make decisions and solve problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I'd say Quaker Oats was a laid-back, go along, get along culture. I worked for Oracle Corporation for 2 years. It was vicious. Yeah. And my immediate boss, a really good guy, Nick, if you're out there, I still love you, would say, Oracle puts the word fun into dysfunctional. But people were highly competitive. I remember working with the team, doing some team building, and I said, instead of competing with each other within the team in terms of your reward system, why don't you have a team performance objective and you'll all be rewarded on your collective results? They thought I was crazy. The idea of trusting each other enough to get into the same boat, literally, to sink or swim, that was just totally unacceptable.
Yeah, for some people it's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, so your point about, and Blanchard's leadership, situational leadership, and then there's Myers-Briggs, so there's all these instruments out there, hundreds of them,
yes.
And of course now they all have their software version, so you get your feedback right away. Yeah. But they're all useful. And then there's DISC. My point about all these instruments and these surveys, whether it's Thomas Kilmann or otherwise, it gives people a framework for having a discussion they might otherwise not have.
Yeah, the awareness is very important because sometimes we may be blindsided about our styles, our approach. So we may sabotage when we work with other people. But when we are aware, now for example, my preferred conflict mode is collaborating. A cultural aspect is there, my upbringing and so on. Mostly I'm a collaborator. But sometimes I find myself collaborating is not right for that situation. You find me competing, especially when my values are violated.
Yeah.
So here is what I do. For example, when I work with people, if they are making decisions, doing things according to the business strategy of the organization, and as far as the decision doesn't violate the corporate value, then I collaborate. I go along. I don't want to compete. I don't want to challenge. I let it go. But the moment the values of the organization or the strategy of the organization is compromised or affected, that's when I become competitive. So this awareness helps me when to just follow my preferred mode, which is accommodating, and go along with people. But I am also aware that sometimes I may need to change my preferred mode because I'm aware, this one requires me to compete. This one requires me to confront and to tackle it. Now, the second preferred mode of mine is avoiding. So when I make decisions, because I'm introvert, many people don't believe me that when I tell them that I'm an introvert. I used to be an extrovert when I was growing up in Ethiopia in Harar, but the more I take leadership positions, most of the decisions I make, most of the challenges that I face require me to separate myself, at least to go for a walk, think about it, reflect about it, and make decisions. But sometimes I don't have time. I have to make decisions. Even if avoiding is good for me, to go and think about it, reflect about it, I make decisions on that spot maybe as a competitor.
Yeah, so you present yourself to the world as an extrovert, even in this role between us. Exactly. You're a closet introvert.
Yes. When it comes to my job, I'm a trainer. I stand before managers, professionals, trainings, facilitate workshops. I'm a media person. I interview people. I read news and so on. When it comes to my passion, my job, I'm extrovert. I go out, meet people, do things, by working with others. But during my off time, I prefer to read books, reflect, go walk, and so on. Since I'm aware now, I know when I need to be a communicator, when I need to go out and market, promote something, and I know when to sit down, reflect, strategize, plan, and read. So leaders, they should know their preferred modes. That helps them to make decisions accordingly, because some of the decisions may require to compete. Some of the decisions, problem solving, they may take them to withdraw, think, reflect, maybe get coaching, mentoring, come back and tackle them.
Yeah, I not only use all these instruments, but I've also taken them. So I'll be in a situation, in a leadership role, and there's always these instruments going through my head, and I'll decide, in the moment, which one, and I'll think about my own preferred leadership mode, and then I'll do a quick scan of the environment, the immediate people, corporate culture as well, and all of that takes nanoseconds. I hope. Yeah, because I say, for example, when you are thrown into a culture for which you are new, for example, it may take you months before you understand the culture. But if you are culturally intelligent, they throw you in a culture where you are a stranger. But you can quickly, as you said, in nanosecond, you immediately watch, scan your environment and see how people interact, and then you quickly adapt. So the leader's ability to adapt into situations, cultures, and so on determines his success or her success. So yeah, that's very important. But one point, I have seen people arguing whether they should solve problems using these problem-solving methods, or they should just forget about problem, focus on the positive side of the organization, and they suggest a method called Appreciative Inquiry. Appreciative Inquiry, yeah, I know it, yeah.
This Appreciative Inquiry, what you do is, you have many problems, maybe customer service, maybe turnover, whatever. Rather than focusing why we have these problems,
right,
focus on the positive side. Okay, what we do helps us to achieve this success, to achieve these positive results, and why don't you duplicate that rather than go to your weaknesses, your problems, and just try to solve them, try to amend them. Because that creates negative energy, frustration, and so on. But people, they trust their past. So if there are some successes in the past, dealing with problems, making decisions, why don't you talk each other and capitalize on that positive side?
Yeah, I know Appreciative Inquiry, and it's a different model in terms of asking people not what's your problem, but asking them, describe when you were excited about your job, or what are some successes, or what would you do to make this really an ideal work environment? And in addressing those questions, they're going to address what's not taking place. But the mindset is toward the positive, appreciating, just like the term, appreciative inquiry, asking questions about what to appreciate.
I wish we have time, but we run out of time, so we have to conclude it.
So in your leadership model, you're telling me what your decision is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So I really enjoyed. We discussed, if we have time, we would have discussed more issues in regard to solving problems and making right decisions. But for now, I really appreciate for you coming here, and I look forward also to have another conversation based on your book or other services that you provide to your organizations.
I'm Assegid. I've had fun.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Dear our viewers, this is my hope that you enjoyed our discussion. The discussion was, yes, our organizations, our families, and our countries might be in lots of problems, and these problems requires us to make decisions, right decisions, ethical decisions. The question is, do we understand what problem is? Do we understand how we can make right decisions. We talked about these things and we shared with you our stories. We suggested some methods you could use. The goal is for you to become a very successful problem solver so that you are needed by your community, your organization, because you solve problems. They pay you when you solve problems. They promote you, they appreciate you. You become the sought after leader when you become an effective and efficient decision maker. I hope you gain something that you could use it. Until we meet next time, have a wonderful time. Thank you very much for watching.